This is session 2 for all of you. Welcome back. I know you've been in small group discussions yourself and raising dozens of questions, objections, considerations. That's part of doing something relationally, is you leave it open to what might pop up and how you'd respond to that. I know we can't hear all of those, but we'll have a hot seat after this second video, and we'll have a chance for people to further clarify and interact with some give and take with me on any of the issues this profound, I think, reorientation requires. Because we're not talking again about relationships for the first time. We're now understanding that they drive the learning more than we ever thought, and that by putting the relationship first, we can get better outcomes for ourselves, i.e. higher joy and satisfaction in what we do and who we are, and also at the same time, increased impact in terms of the tasks we're working on together. So, for this second session, I wanted to again summarize that, especially there at the end, which I went through so quickly, and to let you know that we now know, as I summarized, learning is not limited to the classroom. Community, understanding the school, home, and community contribution to student learning assists in the cultivation of a holistic learning environment, and that requires whole leadership, which is the theme of this conference and what makes successful leadership. So we're looking for learning partnerships now. Relationally, a relational leader is building partnerships, the highest form of learning. We have a little model now to understand how a relationship actually is built. And we found that it goes through a kind of natural hierarchy. You'll see that on the slide. The natural hierarchy, I've just found, goes through, and just from personal experience, not in-depth research, but it seems to make sense to most people, is that relationships develop through some identifiable stages before they get to the partnership stage, which is the most useful to us in education and in learning. The first stage is informational. It's like the first year you go to school and take your kids, it's all brand new. So that's an informational stage. That often, though, by year 4 or 5 or 6, results in facts for forgetting. In other words, it's the first date is another analogy, where we're just getting in touch with each other, starting to figure each other out and make that acquaintance. Very important stage, but that always moves fairly quickly to the second stage, which is understanding. You'll see on the little hierarchy that we then begin to understand the relationship we're in. That can be very confining or can be very liberating because we begin to see the potential. Again, why we see such disengagement from young people in the middle years of learning, and that's anywhere in the world. We see this disengagement because people now understand school's not for them, the classes don't work for them, something's in the way. And that is called understanding. It's not promoting more interest, and that's what we need. That's the third stage, which is valuing. So at some stage in a relationship, you will value being part of that relationship. You will value that interaction and time you have with students before school starts, or in hanging out and just hearing them speak at a debate or luncheon. You'll value that connection to parents and other community members who let you know what the pulse of the community is and what might need to be paid attention to. There might be 15 different issues in the community, but they'll tell you what you need to focus on. And that valuing, once you value the relationship, and there's so many in relational leadership in a school leadership situation, you move to mutual co-created partnering. And that's where everybody is co-creating the relationship. And that's what we at our center help people understand. How do we develop that highest level of a relationship so that we're really actually mutually, reciprocally working together? And I know that's the focus of the SVA project and the collaborative leadership you are all looking for. And it's quite a challenge. I surely will admit that, and want to look at then some of the specific ways we can address that challenge and build those relationships. The place to start is a byline I have found always works. If you want to be a relational leader, your job is to always, first and foremost, activate the well-being of yourself and those around you. Sounds simple, but it's profound in terms of its impact if relationships come first. And that's because we now know that well-being, as mentioned earlier, is not an outcome. Well-being is actually the resource humans bring to their relationships. It's a kind of energy, feeling, interest, and being well is a state that produces the learning and the accomplishments we're seeking. So think for a minute, how do you activate well-being in yourself? For me, this morning it's having a cup of coffee right close by, even though it's cold. It just a bit calms me down, and I just kind of feel a little more together. It could be a walk, it could be time with your dog, it could be a smile, it could be a kiss from a partner in the morning, a welcome to the day. Anything you do that activates your well-being is key. We've had groups do this and they come up with hundreds. So would you just take 30 seconds, and I think there are notepads on your desk, and just simply try to write down one of your favorite ways you activate your well-being. So first and foremost, a relational leader activates well-being in themselves and in those they are having a relationship with. We often ask teachers after they do this activity, which I encourage you to do. It's fail-proof. Post them on the wall, the hundreds of ways. You can't be wrong. If someone reports it activates their well-being, that's a positive point. So we then ask, though, people, what's one way you activate others' well-being? So for parents, we ask them, what's one way you activate your children's well-being or a spouse's well-being? But for teachers, we'll often ask them, well, what's one way you activate the parents' well-being whenever you have a chance? Because they're our partners, as we've mentioned in the research before. And anytime you're activating yours and others' well-being, you really empower the relationship to be a partnership and to work together. And it sets a kind of energy, empathy, trust in motion, all the terms you've heard we want to develop. So first and always, activate well-being. Second, we find it's important to focus when you're looking at relationships. And we focus on 5 relationships. I think they covered the base. We think there are 5 key relationships that every leader can focus on with any stakeholder they're talking to. And that's in your handout. So those 5 relationships are your relationship to yourself, your internal sense of who you are is always critical. The second relationship is your relationship to peers, to others, your age, those close to you. The third key relationship is your relationship to the content. Ironically, not everyone has the same relationship to math and algebra. You might not be like me. I mean, in between these 2 videos, I took a break and took about 20 minutes just to work some quadratic equations, just because I love doing quadratic equations. You get the point. So our relationship to the content in our lives, the topic, being a leader after 5 years, always changes. In our community, how that's going now that we're principal. I could go on, but our relationship to the content is something we need to pay more attention to because it's unique to every person when you're focusing on the relationship. And then to your teacher, to those who guide us, to those who are our leaders, the relationship you have to the teacher. And often the teacher may be the land, the teacher may be a book you're reading. The teacher, we're always being taught in a relationship what's important, what's meaningful, what we might want to consider. And then, of course, your relationship to the wider community around you. And that includes the land and the environment and the wider community and the people and the feeling you have. Some people just, as we did in making these videos, we improved our relationship by simply being outside for a minute and smelling the fresh air and letting that reset who we were and how we were relating. Those 5 relationships, absolutely critical. And then just in this short video, I wanted to emphasize the approaches, which we've put in your handout many other ways to do it, but the power of activating relationally. As relational leaders, we now have discovered there are some actual natural ways of learning that we need to utilize in our relationships because they're naturally there, they're naturally available. And this will take much more exploration, but I'll give you a couple examples of how powerful it is when we as relational leaders activate natural relational ways of learning. And we've discovered there are 6. And those are play, games, story, dialogue, art, and ceremony. So I'm wanting to mention those. You know a few of them by heart, and they're just natural. Play is the natural way we learn. My best definition, and you have many materials, especially if you're working with early childhood, but it applies even later in life. In fact, if you're not playing and you're 55 years old, you're missing out on quality relationship for yourself and others. Playfulness is just the way we are and a way of being. But my favorite definition of play, if you're looking at it before you make it too much a formal subject in the curriculum, is a 5-year-old who said, play is what I do when everyone else stops telling me what to do. Enough said. And then the other aspect as a parallel is games. Games are structured play where we hit rules. And of course, as I've mentioned before and you all know, games, sports based with rules are just fascinatingly engaging, especially for Australians. In fact, games make a huge difference in every aspect of learning. Research done a couple years back, mentioned in the nice reference article too, said if families would just play a board game 1 hour a week for 4 weeks, they would, through that relationship of playing a board game, they would see huge increases in social, educational, and life skills. Playing board games at least weekly help improve children's concentration, social interaction, and cooperation with siblings. It also boosted their patience, concentration, teamwork, sharing, social interaction, communication, sportsmanship, critical thinking skills, maths, and spelling. Wow, what a list from playing a board game 1 hour a week, and people wanted to come back and play them. It was quite transformative, especially in a society where we're all busy doing things instead of interacting with each other and relating. And the board games always work. So, play, games, story. I used that earlier in it. We are all a story. Story frees everyone because you are a story, a unique story. And a relationship thrives as we explore our story and the story of others, and we tell our story. And then story adds to dialogue, and dialogue, as you all know, is the missing ingredient for education today if you want to be a relational leader, because dialogue is a conversation in which you can't know the answer when you start. It's almost that simple. If you know what the outcome of your meeting needs to be and what you'd like people to think and feel, you're not in a dialogue. But in a dialogue, you present a concern, an interest, you listen, and each of you change as you explore your feelings and thoughts around a topic or a subject. Also, dialogue helps you create a feeling of community, a feeling of affiliation that will develop and serve you in your partnership, that highest level of learning. So very, very rich dialogue. In your packets, we've suggested a community conversation and other dialogical approaches. Just remember, a dialogue is a conversation that you can't know the answer to or all the implications when you start, because that's a transaction. And then there's art in all its forms: food, dance, drawing, all the forms of art that are in our lives, poetry, singing, music, all of the forms of the art of living, which is human expression, the deep need to create something that expresses who we are and what's important to us. Every art form is valuable. I know if I want to build a community, just make sure there's some food at every meeting you do. And you all know this. I know in a short video it may seem trite, but you can never lose in moving people through the hierarchy by acknowledging and providing food, which just tells people they are important. We nourish each other. We have a moment and a bite together, and that seems to feed that affinity and affiliation and builds an understanding and valuing of what it means to be together. That's just one example. The other I'll quickly mention, and is in the article which you have in your packets from me, The research has been quite clear a number of times across many countries that if you want to improve math and science performance, simply start a choir at your school, or even a community choir, even better in a rural community, because people who sing together do better in all aspects of life. And I'm not making this up. This is research-based evidence that schools that started, instead of doing more math classes, transactionally working to make people understand what was the benefit of that equation and how it worked, they simply had singing classes, built affiliation, and people drew on themselves when they met the challenges of doing math and responding to mathematical thinking and approaches. The other, which I mentioned earlier on the factors, is any of these approaches that build social capital. Art is a great way for people to get together. Cooking, singing, dancing. It brings us together and it establishes that empathetic affinity we mentioned in the first video is essential for us to connect in a way that allows us to be creative collectively. And then the final, which is quite transformative, is called ceremony. Many of us in this time have been really taken back by the fact that our ceremonies have been curtailed with the pandemic. Think of how many people couldn't have their graduation ceremony or participate in a prom or play some of their favorite sports because you couldn't be together in groups. Ceremony are those times we come together to acknowledge that we're not self-sufficient in ourselves, that there's always a higher power, a higher purpose, a higher reason for humans to be in relationship. And ceremonies acknowledge that. They can become rituals, but people are finding ceremony is a way to acknowledge that the term the South Africans call Ubuntu. I am because of who we are together. So you can create, and I mentioned some of those in the strategies and practices in your handout. A ceremony can become a community gathering at the school to honor and reward people who have fought in wars. Visiting Australia all the time, I know how powerful a day Anzac Day is, because people know that the ceremony of remembering those who've given their lives for our lives connects us in a deep, deep way and generates tremendous energy and power and motivation and even resilience. Back to all the factors we're mentioning socially and personally, the school then can become the place where we can all collectively work better together and activate these natural ways of learning so they're always available to us. So these natural ways of learning are critical, focusing on the 5 key relationships. It always makes sense relationally to focus on key relationships, and activating first and foremost well-being is always a significant way to develop your relational leadership. I don't know what time you're at.
You're at 25 minutes, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm because the handouts cover others, and I can't give the way I do, which this video is doing, is just documenting my style a little more There are hundreds of examples of how you build relationships with different stakeholders, which was mentioned in this section, and I've included many examples, and you'll be talking about them because as leaders, as relational leaders, and with a whole leadership orientation, we're building relationships with people in the community, with these other factors, with the environment we're part of. So building the relationship is an ongoing process. But in summary, I really would like to emphasize, why are we building these relationships? And because it is an instrumental. In summary, we have been building relationships to help us accomplish tasks of managing learning, setting up environments, measuring kids, developing their ability to move on in their careers. All of these tasks that we share in a community are not the point of building a relationship. Ironically, the point of building a relationship is the relationship. Humans only thrive in relationships that are personal, that help us discover who we are, that reveal our destiny. So, in ending, I'd like to caution us in these early sessions to get away from the tendency to see relationships as instrumental to doing our work. They're necessary. You can have a good or bad relationship. What's the point? The point is the relationship is where we as humans grow, develop, and become better human beings. And that I'd like to end with, because if there's any place in the world where the joy of being in relationship is always present, it's in a school. Where else do you have people from different cultures and backgrounds come together for learning? What opportunities are there? Where else do you have a group of 25 children of all levels of ability and interest and one teacher? I don't think God ever intended for one adult to be with 20 year 8s at one time. It doesn't seem natural, but it is an opportunity. So I wanted to end with helping you focus that the purpose of putting the relationship first is just to become a better human being together. And out of that comes immense impact, learning, and growth. And my favorite way to relate that is just to have us keep looking at absolutely the preciousness and brilliance of young people. They're so naturally, many times themselves. They're authentic. They're real. One of my favorites are these following answers provided by 6th graders during history tests. And you could focus on whether they got it right or not. After I read them to you, I think you might agree that being right isn't the key to being a relational leader. It's being real and in connection. Here's some of the answers. Ancient Egypt was inhabited by mummies, and they all wrote in hydraulics. They lived in the Sahara Desert. The climate of the Sahara is such that all the inhabitants have to live elsewhere. A+. Moses led the Hebrew slaves to the Red Sea, where they made unleavened bread, which is bread made without any ingredients. Moses went up Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments. He died before he ever reached Canada. Absolutely a true factual statement. Solomon had 300 wives and 700 porcupines. The Greeks, this is classic across every country, the Greeks were a highly sculptured people, and without them we wouldn't have history. The Greeks also had myths. A myth is a female moth. I could go on, but this last one is quite captivating to mention. Where relational leadership really goes is it brings us back into the joy of being alive and being in relationship with each other. And that is not only the outcome, it's the process, it's the destination and the journey. Socrates was a famous Greek teacher who went around giving people advice. They killed him. Socrates died from an overdose of wedlock. After his death, his career suffered a dramatic decline. So that feeling you end with now, we have to understand back to that reading I gave in the first section when the young woman said, what was more important were the feelings, was the experience. That can't be categorized. That can't be measured concretely and linearly and in just a point of time. So I can't think of a better ending as you look at being collaborative leadership programs to realize the dynamic, ongoing nature of learning and living and working in relationship and putting the relationship first, and the skills that entails and sensibilities will, I think, change everything about the experiences you have and your parents, families, and students.